I just want to welcome you. My name is Helen Burke. I'm a MNCOGI board member, as well as a librarian here at the Minneapolis Central Library. So we come together to celebrate the legacy of John R. Finnegan, publisher at the Pioneer Press, who was instrumental in working with several members of our board, namely Don Gemberling, in quite the legacy of setting up the Minnesota, what we now know as the Minnesota Government Data Practices Act. So each year for the past 26, MNCOGI has celebrated at least one individual whose work has led the board to select them for receiving the honor named for John Finnegan. And this year we celebrate the former State Representative Mary Liz Holberg, Honorable Mary Liz Holberg. And I would just love to take a moment to introduce the board members who pretty much predominate the audience, but nonetheless, we want to introduce them. And then we'll have Steve Sack of the Star Trib give a little talk, and we'll present the award. And then we'd love to have an open discussion, as we have in the past, of developments in the freedom of information climate here in Minnesota. So can I introduce the board members? John Borger is not with us today. Myself, Bill Bushy is here. Hal Davis is here. Pat Doyle. Dushan Drew is not here today, but Matt Ailing is with us. Don Gemberling. Nancy Herther is not here today. Gary Hill, unfortunately, is in Cuba. Maybe it's fortunate for him. Art Hughes is here. Jane Kirtley. Amy Springer-Riegelman is not with us at the moment. Sharon Schmeichel is here. And James Schiffer. There we go. So can I introduce our speaker, Steve Sack of the Star Tribune. He came to our attention. I mean, he's had a long and illustrious career, literally, at the Star Tribune. Won the Pulitzer Prize in 2013 for editorial cartooning. And most recently has spoke eloquently about the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attack in Paris at the Alliance Française and also at an event at the University of Minnesota. So his name naturally came to our attention as a speaker for freedom of information. And so we welcome Steve Sack to give us a few words of his wisdom. Thank you.
Well, we mostly have your board members and Star Tribune staffers here. We could have done this in group chat. Thank you, Helen, for your kind introduction. I'm honored to be invited to be a part of this event celebrating the valuable work of Representative Holberg. I can tell you that I greatly admire her work in this area without even knowing her or what that work is. Because I also admire all of you here who work toward openness and accountability from our government. That's because in many ways I depend on you. When Helen asked me for a title for my remarks today, I suggested an appreciation from an end user, because really that's what I am. I'm an editorial cartoonist. I've been with the Minneapolis Star Tribune for 34 years. 3 years before that with a newspaper in Indiana, and 2 years with the University of Minnesota at the Daily. I've drawn a total of over 8,000 cartoons, some of them good, on subjects as trivial as the weather or the size of Kim Kardashian's posterior, and also somewhat more important topics such as war and peace, human rights, our system of government, and what it means to live in a free society. In other words, I'm interested in the things everyone else is interested in. And like every other John and Jane Q. public, I only know what I read in the newspaper or see on other media. I don't go out myself to dig up the facts behind what's happening in the world, or interview people, or painstakingly dig through obscure government files. I sit in my cushy office and read our paper, or check out other reliable news sources online. Did I push buttons?
I think we might be pushing buttons
Ooh, I'm pushing
inadvertently.
buttons.
Inadvertently. Let's see.
I don't do this
There we
much.
go. There we go. No, you're good. You're good. You're good.
Okay, I might do it again.
Yeah, I'm going to cover it and maybe minimize that opportunity.
Isn't this impressive? Okay, in other words, I'm completely dependent on the efforts of the talented journalists who do the legwork and digging and investigating that goes into preparing a news story. Only when it is made available to the public can I and all of my fellow citizens have enough information to form our own opinion, or in my case, draw a cartoon. Cartoonists have been in the news a lot lately under not so pleasant circumstances. The attacks in Paris on the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists was shocking, and similarly shocking was the case of the Danish cartoonists several years earlier who were threatened with death and in some cases physically attacked in their homes because they dared to test arbitrary limits set by others. As an American, all my life I've simply assumed I had the right to speak my mind with my art, and if anyone didn't like it, they could lump it, or maybe write an angry letter to the editor, or call my boss and demand I be fired, or send me nasty, anonymous, obscenity-filled hate mail. That's all part of the give and take in a free society. You get used to it. But the world today isn't that easy. The events of Charlie Hebdo and the Danish cartoonist caught the world's attention. Things are different. For example, last Friday, I participated in a panel discussion in New York, where I joined 3 other cartoonists at a national convention of student college journalists. Citing security concerns, the New York Police Department required the organizers to spend $4,000 to hire 8 security guards, install metal detectors to screen attendees, and even sprinkle the audience with a number of undercover police officers. It's enough to make a guy feel dangerous. I don't know how many are sprinkled in this crowd. The fact is, even before Charlie Hebdo and the Danish Mohammed cartoon incident, cartoonists around the world have been subject to harassment and intimidation, often by their own governments. Cartoonists in Iran arrested, intimidated, and ultimately forced into exile. Cartoonists in Syria, one of whom was abducted and nearly beaten to death with both hands crushed and broken. Another Syrian cartoonist imprisoned for nearly 3 years now, possibly killed. A cartoonist in India threatened with the death of her and her family for calling attention to the subject of rape culture in that country. A cartoonist in Africa arrested and his newspaper's license to publish revoked. A cartoonist in Malaysia disappeared after death threats and presumed dead. The details of these cases and many more examples of oppression of cartoonists you can find at the website of Cartoonist Rights International Network, a group dedicated to aid embattled cartoonists around the world with financial, legal, and in some cases, diplomatic assistance. As I said, here in America, cartoonists have it much easier. Other than the random, anonymous, vague threat cartoonists might find in a crazy letter, I know of only 2 cartoonists in the USA who received death threats, credible enough to require temporary bodyguard security. The big exception to this is related to the original Danish cartoons. In Seattle, outraged by the Danish cartoons incident, a freelance cartoonist named Molly Norris depicted Muhammad in several cartoons and decided to initiate an Everybody Draw Muhammad Day online. Sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? Her Facebook page received thousands, tens of thousands of submissions, many of them with obscene imagery. Within days, she received death threats, real death threats. The radical cleric Anwar al-Awlaki, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce it correctly, Anwar al-Awlaki, since killed by a drone, labeled her a prime target for terrorists. Molly tried to apologize and shut down her Facebook page, but it made no difference. The threats mounted. As a result, at the FBI's suggestion, and with their assistance, she went into hiding, changing her name and identity, leaving behind her job, family, and friends. The threats to her life were so immediate that she essentially put herself into the federal witness protection program. That was over 4.5 years ago. And for Molly, it appears that there's no end in sight. Her name recently popped up in Al-Qaeda's jihadist magazine called Inspire on a list of most wanted infidel targets for assassination. So that's our world today. Cartoonists attacked for expressing their opinions about information they acquired from something they read in a newspaper. But I have to say, it's the courage of the reporters who gather that information in the first place that I can't forget. Some are at risk and in actual physical danger. Some are risking their jobs or careers. The same goes for whistleblowers and citizens who see things that are not right and decide to speak up by calling a reporter. And certainly it takes courage for groups such as yours to go toe-to-toe with local, state, and national governments to demand openness and transparency from our public institutions. A couple of years ago, I and 3 other Star Tribune fellows were presented with Pulitzer Prizes, which is quite an event for a newspaper. As you can imagine, that announcement in a newsroom causes quite a hullabaloo. Champagne all around, handshakes and backslapping, photos and kind words from executives. But for me, one of the sweetest moments was having the opportunity to thank the reporters and editors and entire staff directly of the Star Tribune for doing the hard part, going out and digging for the truth day after day for 34 years, while I sat in my cushy office and doodled my little wisecracks based on what I read in the newspaper. Which is where you come in, because I know that it can be a hard slog for a reporter to dig past entrenched special interests, both public and private, who would much prefer that we mere citizens only know what they want us to know. Your good work and the work of your national and international counterparts, and today especially Representative Holberg's good work, is invaluable to our reporters and ultimately all citizens. So speaking for all of us end users, I thank you.
Sure. And questions and such? Sure. That'd be great. Wonderful. So now's the part of the program where we show that Steve was correct in placing his praise of our works, and where we recognize the work of several people in the community that have come forward and whose works either they were nominated by the community or themselves for the work that they do to bring sunshine, if you will, into the work of government so that everything gets, well, so that the work that is done for government, by government, with government is done with the knowledge of the people who benefit from it, the public. And so we were lucky to have quite a good bunch of nominees this year. And among them were a reflection of the community. Media groups, we were lucky. The Uptake, which has distinguished itself over the years. Some of us really could not forget the role that they played in the Franken-Coleman recount, and many ways since then. The efforts of Curtis Hanna in making data available actually for open use of marijuana. The efforts of a librarian, the Ramsey County librarian, law librarian, who in her own way, ensures that either the law community or the public is ensured access to laws that can be complicated. And then we also have this year's winner, Mary Liz Holberg, who for 16 years as a legislator was the biggest supporter of open data, of open access to government, largely so that we can all know more about what goes on and that the government can be held accountable. And in presenting the award, I think Don Gemberling, who nominated her, would like to do the presenting.
Those of you who know me know I'm not going to touch any of those buttons. So, in the interest of full disclosure, and given the fact that Mary and Liz and I are both blessed with lustrous white hair, I have to tell you we're really not related, okay? Although I've always felt a certain kinship for her. I didn't do that.
So sorry.
So, by way of introduction, I think Mary Liz served on the Lakeville City Council before she got elected to the legislature. She was elected in 1998. She served 18 years. Recently, she was elected to the Dakota County Board of Commissioners, where thankfully she finally got a pay raise. So, yeah, so. In addition to her work on freedom of information and government accountability issues, Mary Liz also functioned in a variety of leadership positions in the Minnesota legislature. She occupied powerful posts like the chairman of Ways and Means, daunting tasks like transportation, finance, and policy, and also served on civil law, which is where she focused on our kind of issues. So in many ways, you know, even without our kind of issues, she has a really extraordinary record of service and devotion and real skill in the public policy arena. So she could be honored just for that. But I was thinking this morning about how we view people, how we make decisions about people, which is much of what the current discussion about privacy is about. And Mary Liz is one of those people, if you read her legislative biography, the kind of thing they put in what are called the green books, you'll see that Mary Liz is a homemaker, small business owner, and elementary education from St. Cloud State University. And I got to tell you, if you kind of make a judgment about her based on that, you're going to miss a really, really sharp and penetrating mind, okay? And somebody with that wonderful ability of cutting through bureaucratic jargon, a lot of lobbyist obfuscation, and able to really get into the heart and deal with real issues of government accountability, privacy, and freedom of information. So, in recognition of that ability and her work on more issues than I want to think about over 16 years, ranging from, part of our relationship with Mary Liz would call me and say, I read something in the paper, kind of like what Mr. Sack, why are we not able to tell the public that we're investigating an employee for stealing from a public employer? And I said, well, the Data Practices Act says blah, 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 and particularly if there was a legislative session, within a matter of hours, there'd be a bill in to fix that. So I can't cite you the provision, but it's in the Data Practices Act. So in doing her work the way she did, Mary Liz was a fierce partisan for many of her issues, but she was a partisan in the sense that, that she gained immense respect from both sides of the aisle, and well-deserved, I might add, because of the way she goes at her work and an appreciation of her real talent at being able to deal with very difficult issues. I won't add, I will add, she has a wonderfully wicked sense of humor. So, given that, to somebody like me who thinks of himself as a small d Democrat, she really is a wonderful demonstration of what I think Thomas Jefferson had in mind when he talked about representative government, that it was possible for people who come from what appear to be pretty humble origins and backgrounds are able to really achieve important results in participation in the public policy process. So, given that, the Coalition on Government Information is very honored to give this year's John R. Finnegan Award to Mary Liz Holberg, with thanks for all of her efforts. And I happen to know, because she still calls me, that in her new role, she's spending a certain amount of time educating the Dakota County Board and Dakota County employees on the Data Practices Act, which she was kind enough to share out in the hall that they all hate. So, which means it must do something right. So, Mary Liz, thank you. Up, or? Okay, Anna, got it?
Thank you.
So,
Wow,
yes.
very nice.
I can tell you that John Finnegan would have liked you.
Okay.
Okay. He wouldn't have always agreed with you,
Right.
but he would have respected you. So,
Well,
as
thank
do
you.
all of us.
Well, thank you very much. Well, thank you for those kind words, and Mr. Sack, I have to say that your recent cartoon with Governor Dayton and Tom Bach in dancing outfits was one of my favorites, so I just had to bring that up. When I wasn't sure when I received the letter from Mr. Hill and he asked that I speak for 10 minutes, I wasn't really sure, but what do I say to a group that already knows how important these issues are? So, I thought I'd just give you a little background and how I got to the point that I was. In 1998, Bill Macklin, my predecessor, received a judicial appointment from Governor Carlson, which left an open seat. And at that point, I was a stay-at-home mom helping my husband run a business. I was on the Lakeville City Council with a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and you know, things were just going along fine, and I saw the names of the people that had thrown their name in the hat. Some of them were actually Democrats. And my phone started ringing, and people started saying, you should do this, you should do this. And I initially thought they were really quite crazy. But when I saw the list of people whose names, I wasn't sure I wanted any of those people to be my representative in St. Paul either. So Bill Macklin was my parents' attorney. So I went down to his law office in downtown Lakeville and sat with him for an hour and really asked a lot of questions about what would this entail, you know, how does it work, blah, 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 and, you know, he shared all of his thoughts. And it's the first time I ever heard the word the Data Practices Act, and one of the things he shared with me that was an area of public policy that he really enjoyed working on, and he was trying to illustrate the wide range of issues as a legislator that you could work on. So long story short, I end up winning. I get stuck on the Civil Law Committee. Well, I mean, I'm not a lawyer. What the heck? I have no interest in this stuff. I felt Speaker Swigum was punishing me because really he supported one of those 7 other people, not me, for the endorsement, and he stated to me quite succinctly that I was the freshman most likely to be reelected, that I would be the lowest person on the totem pole in the caucus as a result, to not expect to carry any marquee bills, and oh, by the way, you'll probably get your last choice of committee assignments. So I viewed my assignment to the Civil Law Committee as a reflection of the reality of my position in the caucus. And I knew from a very young age that knowledge was power, and that I had no power in the hierarchy of the caucus and the legislature as it stood, but that if I did my homework and I read every bill before it came to committee, and if I knew the answers before I asked the questions, that would be a path to be able to accomplish things. And so that was my approach. Well, one day, this big, large, white-haired guy shows up at my door
with a very nice woman and says, I'm Don Gemberling and this is Katie Engler, and Chair Smith has decided you are going to carry the data practices bill. And I'm like, oh, can I swear? I'm like, shit. You know, once again, I'm lowest on the totem pole. I'm getting dumped on. I'm getting the job nobody else wants. Like, you know, what the heck is this stuff? Well, very soon I recognized how important it was. I recognized that there weren't always easy answers. And I recognized that it was a very important area of public policy. So I started doing my work, and some of you may have remembered, and I got into it pretty thick and pretty quick and pretty deep, and actually really enjoyed it. And eventually stumbled upon a database held by the Police Chiefs Association of Minnesota that every way we looked at it, with the help of Don and others, it was really illegal. I mean, they really weren't following any of the rules. At the time, and a letter had been, an opinion had been written by Laura Beyer-Kapinski. She was the counsel for Commissioner Stanek at the time. The Department of Public Safety was in the process of taking over control of this really schlocky database. And worse yet, members of the public had access to it very freely. People were exchanging the Hurl, HRRL address over fences in their backyard, people that had no commonality for employment or whatever, so it was pretty pervasive that out in the public, people were accessing this information that had all incidence data for dozens of communities for dozens of years. I think it was over, I don't know how many millions of records on how many millions of people, but it was a lot. And finally I said to somebody, until I have more information, this is really hard for me to get at it. I'm hearing rumors, so I got a phone call at my home one night and said, with permission, if you give me your name, address, and birth date, I will go into this system and I will tell you what is in the system about you. I'm like, okay, I'm up for that. So I give them the information. This individual provided me with 6 very random events that were contained in incident reports. At the time I was Lakeville City Council, this was before cell phones. I stopped at a local Super America because there was a driver driving erratically to turn in a description and license plate number. One evening at 2 o'clock in the morning, I called the local police because there were kids in our side yard partying. My neighbor called to complain where I was parking my car. So, I mean, the randomness of these items were nothing that this individual could recreate. So I knew that he was definitely into the system. Well, long story short, law enforcement came after me, accused me of breaking the law, accessing their system. I had to hire an attorney in order to protect my rights, to keep my sources similar to reporters. Legislators have that speech right as well. So I had to hire my own attorney to assert my right under that protection. A couple days went by. They shut down the whole system, blamed me for it. They then called me back a couple days later, said it was back up, it was safe. I called my source. He tried to get in, was right back in again. The BCA didn't even know that they hadn't fixed their own system. I mean, it was just, in some ways, Keystone Cops, but in another way, a deeply ingrained lesson. And in that same period of time, I was driving with my daughter, and something happened in that something hit my car, and I felt that my car had been shot at. And I remember in the mix of all this having that really gut feeling of, oh crud, do I call the cops or not? If I do, I'm going to be in that stupid database, and what are they going to do with it? Knowing as a citizen, it was probably my duty to contact the police because obviously something was going on that could harm people or injure property, etc. But as a result of my experience, my attitude had changed about whether or not I was going to turn over information to government, because the experience with the police was not good. Consequently, I've probably been butting them heads, and I remember at one time, and this wasn't related directly to this incident, but I was going toe-to-toe, nose to nose with Rich Stanek when he was a committee chair, and I was on the Judiciary Finance Conference Committee, and I was sharing with Phil Krinke this interaction that I was having with Rich Stanek, and Phil says, "Mary Liz, don't you know he carries a gun?" Rich was kind of saying, "What are you doing? He carries a gun." And I'm like, "But he's wrong. I don't care if he's carrying a gun. He's wrong." And so this whole thing, and to this day, law enforcement, I think they have a healthy respect for how I approach things and to disagree without being disagreeable. But I remember a couple of years after this incident, Mr. Delmonico, I don't know how many of you know him, but he's a very large, I don't know what his particular position is with the Minneapolis Police Department. I always get the titles wrong, but he's pretty high up there in the Minneapolis Police, and he was in my office discussing an issue, and he was kind of doing that cop thing, get in your face thing, and I sat up, on the edge of my couch and looked at him, and I said, "I am not afraid of you." And he got this look across his face, like kind of startled, and then he just belly laughed, and he goes, "That's what I love about you." He goes, "I know you're not afraid of us." So, a lot of fun things. Moving forward, we did get the Data Practices Commission. I'm disappointed that they're not really using it as yet. We've seen a lot of dysfunction around the LPR issue. I don't know how these items are going to get resolved. In my new position, I'm of course learning how on the local level the attitudes and applications of data practices, in my mind, are being, I think they're going very close to the line sometimes, and may in fact even be crossing the line. It concerns me. I think there's a lot that can be done for the culture around local government and how they interact, and it, of course, something that I've always known but has been so amplified is how much public money is spent on behalf of lobbying, et cetera, to go to the legislature. There's been times, some of you have been in the room where I've asked people to raise their hand if they're representing and being paid by some organization versus those in the room that are just representing individuals, and it's usually about a 10-to-1 cut. And, I'm seeing the costs and the effort and how the full court press and the coalitions of local governments to thwart the access and opportunities for individuals to get access to information. So that's pretty frustrating. So there's plenty more work to do. I'm thrilled to receive this award. Don, thank you for your kind words. And in closing, I'm going to go back to where I started. I told you about my conversation with Bill Macklin in his office, and so long story short, I go for the endorsement. There's 7 people running. I get my 60% on the second ballot. I have the meeting with Speaker Swigum. He reluctantly, encourages me. Don't see him till November. But a couple months into my first year, I'm in the grocery store and I run across Judge Macklin. Judge Macklin. Remember that talk we had back in May? He's like, "Yeah, why?" I said, "You lied. And he started laughing. And he said, "Had I told you the truth, would you have run?" And I said, "Probably not." And he said, "Consider that a compliment." So, thank you very much. Go sit down or answer questions? Or what?
Yeah. This is sort of open. I'm not sure that we need a mic, but this is where we recognize anybody that has received the award in the past, and we ask that common question of what difference it's made in your life. because it may make a difference in your life that you have this Finnegan Award. We can say that last year, Marshall Helmberger won the award of the Timberjay paper, and his efforts really led to a Minnesota Supreme Court case, and actually the law being changed so that there is much more access to subcontractor data, and there's still some distance to go for that, but that did make a difference. The Data Practices Commission, as we are waiting for that to, but the fact that it exists is wonderful. And I don't know if there's anybody that wants to talk just freely amongst ourselves about issues that might have brought them here today, or board members, we're not going to hold a meeting, but maybe if there's issues that we want to.
I'll just say a comment based on what you're asking. I was a former
Yeah,
winner.
yeah.
And I want to give a couple compliments.
Which one?
Mary Liz Holberg, again, thank you.
Which, by the way, last time I saw Rich, he had just got done taking all of my data practices files that I didn't want. He spent a whole afternoon on a Saturday. Last time I saw him, he was unloading boxes out of the back of my car on whatever busy street in St. Paul you live on a Saturday in the middle of the Christmas market, cruising across the traffic with people honking at us as he took, 6 or 7 boxes of my files to his apartment.
And I'm using them.
Okay.
But the thing, and again, just, talk about the John Finnegan Award. It is unique, and John Finnegan would be proud of you and the winners of the past who are continuing that endeavoring thing, for open government and to balance the right to privacy and all that. About the commission, one of the things that I know some people are working on is there's a bill, I believe, by Eric Lucero for some funding, because one of the things that's really important is for the legislature to help itself. It needs staff. You can't rely on secretary-type people to do things as they were as the commission for the last few months. Big issues, as you know, the AP story that was in the St. Paul Pioneer Press today about the whole issue of electronic records and the status of that. That's a very important one to address. People like myself and Don and Mary Liz and other folks who habitate the legislature for the last many years know that that is an issue and continues. But then events happen. And so thank you, Hillary, for those things, so that maybe there will be something. Peggy Scott, who is sort of taking up the void that is still there at the legislature, is doing a lot of learning and coming up, and who recently was in the newspaper article talking about that. And the third point is more of what's the future. It was basically, I wanted the John R. Finnegan Award in 2009. Mm-hmm. And I always had access, and I knew where to go and what to do. But it always, it takes time, and so in 2010, miraculously, by someone, gave me a computer. And so I started doing blog posts. And so it was a combination of the blog posts and then the publicity of the John R. Finnegan Award that's helped me out today to where I have learned about a lot of younger people who are very much younger than me, by like 35 years, who have just as strong as a passion and a commitment to privacy, yes, and liberty, privacy, but also to open government, open data, and all that. And one of the things that was kind of interesting is I've said publicly, maybe not as much, but that Don Gemberling did take a young kid like me, well, at that time was young, I don't know, 23, 24, I'll be 60 next month. sort of helped me learn the ropes as I learned the ropes of the legislative process about immigration policy. But what was kind of interesting was Kurt Hanna, the gentleman who's 25 years old, 26, give or take, maybe, a young kid, who said on his tweet, just on his own, and I would like to thank a mentor of mine, among the handful, Rich Neumeister, who know basically how to get in there and fight and be a pain in the ass, and just you're right, you get it. So it comes back to the first original point that I was talking about. There are some challenges, but it's important for us and such organizations as MNCOGI. And I'll tell you up front and directly, I'm a big promoter of you guys. I do a lot of stuff. I mention, I tell people, hey, talk to Matt Allen, talk to Don Gemberling. It's one of the things. There's more information about you as an entity and how you can do that transition to then help some of the young people who are coming up. Mr. Bushy, who I met at the Open Data thing over at Hennepin County. A lot of folks. I also talked to them about how to get encouragement to go to segments of our community that laws and open data can be helpful. And then it goes from what Mary Liz is always consistently, knowledge is power. I've learned that, information is power. Because, just use it on one item today. Matt Elling, who's Public Records Media, who was a winner, again, with the John R. Finnegan Award. So you're in good company. Don also.
2005.
A couple of years ago, did a request about drones in the BCA and the kinds of drones, if they were using drones and all that. Well, it just so happens that there's a drone bill now going through the legislature. And I just so happen, as I always do at the legislature, I get off work, run my rear end up, and it's the last bill on the topic, don't know what's up. I started looking at the legislation. Oh, drone bill, I want to testify on that. Well, what happened is Drew Evans, who's the second in command of the BCA, basically says, we don't use drones, we don't own drones, we don't do those kinds of things. But then I remember that Freedom of Information Act, which was actually a data practice act. And again, the power of information. So I got up in my testimony, like I typically do, very loose, very. I says, I don't know if Drew Evans, the BCA borrows them, owns them, but I know that they have used them or whatever. I said something like that, and I referred to the Freedom of Information or the Data Practices Act. I meant that. All of a sudden, very conservative. You got to remember, all these issues are nonpartisan. That's the blessedness of all this stuff. So Senator Hall got up and, Mr. Evans, could you come on up? Would you like to enunciate a little bit or what you're trying to do? And all of a sudden he said, oh, yes, we have, in cooperation with the Department of Homeland Security, have, you won't say used, or you won't say borrow, but somehow they were involved. We weren't looking over marijuana fields.
We did a joint project to overfly marijuana fields.
Okay. And then I looked at Brian Back's AP story, and it uses the words obtain, and even they say they use. But it shows what we're all here in our own little ways trying to do. Try to make a government more accountable, more open, and to where we can all make a difference. And so I illustrated to you just simple, and I've done thousands of requests verbally, orally, written. One of them was the stinger, where I, and James Schiffer, who took upon, because I don't have no lawyers and stuff, and James Schiffer did a lot of work and got one. And we got exposed about things. But it can make a difference, and I just hope that MNCOGI will start to develop some things. Then we as a community could start bringing in some of the younger people. I said it on my tweet, my Twitter feed. Hey, there's a lot of us that are not getting any older, or getting younger, and there needs to be some new folks showing up at the legislature soon, because things are starting to change. So I just wanted to share that. I really I appreciated always your open door, and, you know, we're all have a kindred spirit of all these things with a lot of folks that are here. Once again, thank you for
Congratulations. It's good. I don't know, Matt, do you want to say a few words about the Legislative Commission, the MNCOGI Legislative Commission? And the work?
Curious to ask Mary Liz actually
Yeah.
what, how you'd like to see them utilized. You know, it was your vision to have that impaneled. I'd be curious to see how you'd like to see them used coming up.
I mean, it doesn't even seem like they've met, or I'm not even sure if they've been appointed, and so it's a little frustrating. And I mean, I look at LPR on its third year, and just the games that are being played, and it's so frustrating. And you know, law enforcement is they're like in some ways bullying about, well, if you don't do what we want, this stuff's all going to go public in August. And I've told my colleagues, good. If this all goes public in August, we will know where they're placing these. We will know how they're using them. We will know what they're doing. In every offer that they've made, certainly there's issues around how long you store it, but they have fought at every turn any type of accountability for where they place them, how long they're there, how do they choose to place them, what do they, you know, you look at the Mall of America. We know that the Mall of America provides massive amount of incident data to the city of Bloomington. The city of Bloomington has chosen to classify all the information coming from the Mall of America as security data. And so, I mean, some of these bigger issues are just not being addressed. So in some ways, let's go public in August. And I would have a prediction. I'm guessing that if they were facing everything go public in August, I'm guessing they would dump a bunch of the data. Just a guess. I mean, I look at MnDOT, and they collected all of that data on individuals without proper classification for the mileage study that they did, and they wanted to keep that forever, and I was really, you know, adamant about that, and they chose to dump all the individual data and only save the summary data versus the accountability measures. You know, so it's really interesting. There's a lot of stand down, and at some point I think, I don't think it's all bad if everything went public in August and we could figure out exactly how they're using this, because I guarantee you we are not getting the entire story from law enforcement. That's a given. It's a given, and they have their own reasons for that, and I respect that, but given electronic surveillance, all the things on the horizon, how can we as individuals protect ourselves if we have no clue what they're doing? I mean, at least you want a fair fight, right? We're probably going to lose in the long run, but at least have a fair fight with enough sunshine so we know what they're doing. So if there are opportunities to protect ourselves, we can. Here's a perfect example. My daughter registered Tyson for kindergarten. They want his entire medical history related to immunizations. She's not willing to give them the dates of the immunizations. And so she signed the form where it said that he is fully immunized, and they said, well, we need his medical record. She says, I'm not giving it to you. So in the alternative, I will be happy to sign the conscientious objector standard, even though he's fully immunized, rather than give you, a school district, the medical record that you're going to share with the Department of Health and, you know, put into longitudinal studies or who knows what. I mean, now DEED is getting school records, so who knows where, you know, in the long run where all this stuff goes. So Rich, there are some members of the younger generation that, you know, so I'm guessing she's going to sign on as a conscientious objector, even though this child is completely immunized.
Could you just share some insights that you've seen playing on the state level, now in your new role as commissioner? 2 or 3 little kind of humorous vignettes or things you've discovered about open meeting and data practices on the local level?
Well, I mean, I think and we hear this all the time from locals, that it's too hard, it's too cumbersome. And certainly, I am new, I'm still learning, and so I would, in some arenas, be reticent to give a full opinion or analysis, given that I'm new to the new arena, if you will. But it's, I think they struggle with it. And, I mean, you look at the 5 counties, the 5 collar counties that are now meeting as a group, they've each assigned 3 county commissioners to this group to look at collar county issues related to Met Council. Well, why did each of the 5 counties choose 3 county commissioners? Because in no instance are any one of those a quorum. And so you have, on a fairly regular basis now, 15 metropolitan commissioners. Now, I don't think that their meeting places or times are hidden or whatever, but I think that in the strict interpretation of the open meeting law, they wouldn't be subject to it, because in no of the 5 counties is there, of course, a quorum involved in that. But you would hope that the meetings were public and the agendas and the information were posted somewhere if you have this critical mass of 15 metropolitan legislators meeting on a monthly basis to try and figure out an approach to work more effectively with the Met Council. And off the record now, I'm probably in trouble with my colleagues, but oh well.
I want to illustrate from last week, actually, a couple of things. Sometimes the implacability of law enforcement just drives me up the wall, because you can't move them in what I consider to be rational discussion. And here's an example. At the beginning of the body cam debate, much of the patter from legislators who are law enforcement, they're law enforcement officers, involved how we had to protect the privacy of individuals in their homes when cops entered their homes with the cameras. And if any of that information was public under the Data Practices Act, we'd be seeing pictures of naked children, semi-clothed women, which I thought was an interesting comment. We don't worry about semi-clothed men, but and it was just like, are you kidding me? So last Friday there was an amendment considered in Senate Judiciary, the amendment to the body cam bill, that would say basically that when a law enforcement officer enters our homes, we have the right to say, turn off the camera, unless it's an emergency situation. At which point law enforcement got up and argued strenuously that in the interest of transparency, we couldn't have them turn off the camera if somebody said, I don't want that in my house, and there was no emergency. And I'm going, wait a minute, okay? So now that's point number 1. Point number 2 is something I'm sure MNCOGI board members have probably heard too much from me, but when the Data Practices Act was initially created with the presumption that all government information would be public and that only the legislature would be able to make data not public, the anticipation was these issues would be heavily covered and the public would be able to learn a lot more about the legislature doing this, and we'd invite a lot of public comment by covering those issues quite well in the media. And by having it done in the legislature as opposed to other systems where it's done in courts, there'd be much better public influence over the decision making. And for a number of years, particularly when John Finnegan was still working, if you go back and look at his reporter's notebook columns over the years, particularly during the legislative session, you'll see a recurring theme of what weird stuff the legislature is doing with information now. But somewhere, and I understand that some of the economic realities of the media business, somewhere we've lost that, okay? So here's the illustration of that from last Friday. The Senate Judiciary Committee considered body cams for about 2.5 hours. They considered drones for about 45 minutes. When I opened my newspapers, I found no stories about any of that discussion. I did find a very interesting story about a guy back east who got a penis implant, or a penis transplant. And I thought, does this say something about how we do things? So somewhere in this discussion, we need to continue to have a dialogue of how we educate the public, how we make sure that more of these decisions get more openness. And as Richard says, some of us ain't getting any younger. So, and I really do encourage that kind of dialogue. The story about the retention issues is another place where somebody needs to start talking about the fact that the governor's office relies on a case that was decided in 1968 that was 5 years before the official records, the records management statute defined records that are subject to its requirements, and nobody has ever challenged them, okay? And, you know, I think they're wrong. I think legally you can prove they're wrong, but nobody stepped up to the plate to raise that issue. And why do we care? Because at the moment, the governor's office decides what is and isn't official and throws everything away. So if you want to know, for example, I drove by that temple on the way here today, just what the considerations were to give Ziggy Wolf all that money to build that temple down at the other end of town, based on the governor's office, we'll never know that, based on emails and other records. And that's a shame. We ought to know. So, sorry, that was a little bit too much of a speech, but.
I want to acknowledge that it's after 1. I know there was one question from.
Yeah, my name is Rick Keller. I officially represent the twice exceptional and print disabled. I lobby up at the Capitol since 2009. And I had, in January of this year, I believe your organization had a press conference. And I had brought up about how important transparency was, but how about making the content fully accessible. Obviously that was cut out of the streaming video, and John Lesh has yet to get back to me regarding that. Currently, my studies find that the legislature has exempted themselves from statute 16E.03, subdivision 9, which only requires state agencies require content accessibility. Also, they have exempted themselves from data practice law. But however, there are internal documents, according to Patrick upstairs in the revisor's, not revisor's office, but on the research, Patrick McCormick is his name, and he said that they do have internal documents in subdivisions of the legislature, however, that considers what's classified and non-classified, data specific and data public. But those documents aren't available. However, they do a case-by-case basis. So what I find interesting about because they have exempt themselves from 2 statutes, not only have they done that, but when third-party vendors bring information down there and post it online, and they're required to secure it because it comes a state document, that if it's in Word, Microsoft Word, or HTML, they scan them in. So now you just took transparency out of government because you can't search. You can't search an image document, nor will a JAWS reader read it. So it's something to consider when you guys look at this in a serious way. When you look at Statute 13, which talks about electronic, what does that mean? Does that mean it's all images? I myself consider it a non-reader. However, how I gather core information is through oral and through search engines. You might consider the whole party a group of individuals that look at documents in the future.
Great. Thank you for your question. Well, I think that concludes our ceremony, and we just want to thank and congratulate Representative Holberg again. Thank you.